Good morning. You're watching Business World Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's 10:03 a.m. this Thursday morning here in Metro Manila. We are a little over 30 minutes into our trading day. Let's go straight to our top story. Local banks' bad loans climbed by more than a quarter in the month of June, reflecting the range of the pandemic's impact. You can see on your screens here data from the central bank showed non-performing loans rise 27% in June compared to the same month a year ago. At the same time, total loans slightly dipped in June. Now, despite this, the central bank says the deterioration in the banking industry's portfolio is expected given the ongoing health crisis. Now, amid the rise in bad loans, the industry boosted its provision for credit losses by nearly half to 300 billion pesos in June. The central bank says they do not expect banks' bad loan ratio to reach the level similar to past crises. The NPL ratio peaked at 17.6% in 2002 during the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. The government, meanwhile, is ready to back loans for small businesses. State-run Philippine Guarantee Corporation said it agreed to provide partial guarantee to 6 banks issuing loans worth 10 billion pesos for MSMEs. The agency is looking to provide 50% guarantee cover of 12,000 MSMEs affected by the ongoing pandemic. So much to be reporting for this markets report, so bear with me, but let's kick off on the global front. You can see on my terminal here how Wall Street had performed overnight. Take a look at the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 up by more than 1%, but the Nasdaq bringing that to 2.1% of a gain. So these peers actually surpassed for a very brief time their all-time closing highs, led by those technology shares. Investors are continuing to be highly optimistic about that, given the fact that there is a lot of stimulus still being discussed over in the United States. There's also the Federal Reserve saying that there were more urgencies about protecting this nascent recovery over in the U.S. Oil had also surged after the easing, the earlier signs rather of improving demand. But nevertheless, a lot of issues still when you talk about the pandemic. Global cases have topped 20.3 million. Deaths have surpassed 743,000. Now, amid all of this, you've got, of course, that big news where Russia is planning already to make commercially available its vaccine even before the clinical trials have been finished. They have defended the safety of what should be the world's first COVID-19 vaccine. This, of course, after they announced these mass inoculation plans this month. However, there's a lot of scrutiny on this. You've got French Health Minister Olivier Véran. He said in a TV interview that France will never offer a COVID-19 vaccine if it actually has not passed the phase 3 trials. They did mention that there are European and American vaccine research teams currently undergoing phase 3 trials or more advanced in terms of that. Just to mention here, taking a look at how Europe has performed also overnight, actually in the green, you've actually got the UK having announced a contraction of more than 20% in just the second quarter. So very hard hit, even worse than the Philippines had seen in terms of its second quarter GDP. Now let's turn over to the home front. You've got the Philippines having reported 4,444 new infections on Wednesday. You're a little over 143,000 cases now. That's a 46% increase in COVID-19 cases just since the start of August. We are, of course, now known as the coronavirus hotspot over in Southeast Asia. President Duterte, meanwhile, had accepted Russia's offer of that coronavirus vaccine. Secretary of the Department of Finance, Sonny Dominguez, also mentioned that they are in talks with the US, UK, and China for vaccine supplies. Apart from that, you've also got them clinical trials for a virus drug from Japan. This is the antiviral drug Avigan. This from Undersecretary of the Department of Health, Maria Vergier. She mentioned that from August 17, they will be trying out this drug. It will cover 100 patients aged 18 to 74 across 4 hospitals in Metro Manila. Now, according to AAA Equities' Chris Mangon, it is these hopes of the vaccine that have actually spurred our local bourse. And if you take a look at your screens here, you can see us finally going back to those 6,000 levels we have so long for. And we had 5 straight weeks in the red. We're actually continuing that rally that we've seen since Monday. And this, according to Chris Mangon, apart from the vaccine hopes from Russia, we've also got the fact that the lockdown is likely to be eased from next week, from August 18. There was a lot of trading yesterday. Around 17 billion worth of shares switched hands, even as foreigners continued to sell. Now, another one that is putting some optimism here is First Metro and the UANP. They say that the index may actually rise to 7,000 this year, and that's despite being Asia's worst performer since the end of 2019. So they see it between 6,500 to 7,000, driven by the government's fiscal stimulus and, of course, the monetary policy by the central bank. This would actually be an 8.4% gain from yesterday, and 30% up from the low that we saw in March 19. So they did mention that they're looking for earnings to rebound. Christina Ulang, a First Metro head of research, she says that the market is very rich when it comes to tactical trades. Important that investors should be strategizing. They also mentioned that equities are more attractive than sticking with bonds. So you've actually got 7.1% earnings when you look at the equities compared to the 2.75% 10-year bond yield. However, they are still cautioning the fact that GDP could actually contract by 8 to 9% this year, even as they believe it will be bouncing back in 2021. Panelists at the briefing, however, said we are still in a better position compared to previous crisis. Now, let's move on to specific stocks. I want to take a quick peek at the A-REIT. That is, of course, listed just today. And we can take a look at your screens here. It is actually trading below its IPO price. So it listed at 27 pesos. It's now listing at 26.90. It had pre-opened above the IPO price at 29%. So again, the A-REIT, Ayala Land's first REIT that we've ever issued here in the country, is actually trading below its IPO price. We'll be following that later on. Meanwhile, its parent company, Ayala Land, is actually seeing gains together with the rest of the local boards. That is up by 0.5%. Now, speaking of properties, let's take a quick peek at some earnings that I need to be breaking for you guys today. Kicking off with Mega World, so another big property player here. Mega World earnings, according to Kevin Tan, their chief strategy officer, in the second quarter, not as bad as expected. So nevertheless, still a drop. You can see on your screens here, down 56% in the second quarter. That's 2.1 billion pesos. That brings the first half net income down by 34% to 5.9 billion pesos. But even as they had actually released this contraction in earnings, you can see on my terminal here how Mega World is up by 1.7%. So again, possibly not as bad as people had been expecting. Another one that is seeing contraction when you talk about earnings is Pizza. So that is, of course, Shakey's. They did mention that they are posted a 290 million peso loss on the back of store closures, of course, during the strict lockdown periods. You can see on their screens the first half net loss versus what they saw as a profit of 389 million pesos in the same period of last year. They did not disclose their sales, but they did mention in the first half it was down by 31%. Recall, we've already reported this. They had to close 91% of most of its stores during the strictest lockdown period. Right now, 95% are already operational, but still, these are on shortened hours. These are mostly delivery, not a lot of dine-in yet. But they did say that hopefully the worst is behind them. The second half will see them breaking even. You can see pizza here trading at 5 pesos and 40 centavos. That is down by 1.8%. And I'm sorry to be adding to these losses here, but Sebpac has also just released their earnings, and it has, not very surprisingly deepened its losses here. The second quarter net loss is 7.96 billion pesos. I repeat, that's close to 8 billion pesos that they've lost in just one quarter versus a profit of close to 4 billion pesos last year. The revenues down 93% on the back of 60% decline in passengers. This, of course, has been something that a lot of analysts have already expected. Nevertheless, it appears that people are still selling off the stock that is down by 2.2%. Another thing to be highlighting here, you've actually got S&P, so that's Standard & Poor's, expecting an even steeper decline when it comes to global air traffic. They're expecting it to fall by as much as 60 to 70% in 2020. That's a deeper slump than what they had previously predicted at the end of May, which was a 50 to 55% slump. So more markets later on in the broadcast. Meanwhile, let's check in on the big headlines that we are watching this Thursday morning. The Philippine Statistics Authority is currently studying the participation of the private sector in the registration process for the National ID program. The agency says the search for potential partners could begin very soon. National statistician Dennis Mapa said initial registrations will be conducted this year, but a parallel process with an outsourced partner may also take place in 2021. The National ID plan seeks to focus first on low-income households, particularly on the unbanked. The PSA hopes to start registrations by November. The Trade Department is seeing a surge in newly registered online businesses. That's as many companies are forced to shift to e-commerce amid the lockdown restrictions. The agency said that as of August, there are around 68,000 business names registered under internet retail. Now, in the month of May alone, new business name registrations under internet retail stood at almost 9,700. That's nearly 450% higher than those registered during the first quarter. The DTI said this growing interest in online retail calls for the government to scale up e-commerce interventions. Together with the UP Law Center, the agency is now planning to update its e-commerce roadmap, focusing on retail security and speed. More online businesses, however, translated to a spike in complaints in online transactions, with the DTI receiving over 9,000 complaints during the first 5 months of the year versus the around 2,400 consumer complaints during the same period of last year. The Anti-Red Tape Authority ordered the first batch of local governments to release pending permits for the telco towers. The initial set of compliance orders were sent to 11 LGUs that are now required to submit compliance reports within 3 days. The first batch of compliance orders were sent to Puerto Princesa City and Rizal in Palawan, Miagao, Cabatuan, Estancia, and Leon in Iloilo, Calibo in Aklan, Masbate City, Bulan in Sorsogon, Canaman in Camarines Sur, and San Jose in Occidental Mindoro. The report of these local governments should include a list of all approved and pending applications and those requiring approval from the LGU Sanggunian. The report must also explain why permits are still pending. ARTA noted that the Ease of Doing Business law provides a clear provision for the fast approval of permits for the telco towers, and that the refusal to follow this will lead to administrative and criminal charges. Taking a break from the bad earnings news and looking into new ways of innovation, particularly when we talk about education technology. Now, with physical classes here in the Philippines to resume, the earliest in 2021 yet, what alternatives do we have for learning? Here to share with us PLDT's initiatives, we have spokesperson Mon Isberto. Good morning, sir.
Hi, good morning, Danie. How are you?
I'm good, sir, and you look very well and healthy indeed. So very good to see you looking so good. Sir Mon, PLDT is now taking education under its wing. In addition to a lot of things that it is, doing right now, you guys have launched a webinar series. This is specific to equip the administrators and teachers and help students for blended learning. Tell us more about that.
Well, we have to start off, Danie, our positioning in this particular situation is to support the efforts of the educators. Hindi naman kami ang subject matter experts. So we have to take our cue from the educators. And what the education system has said is that they're going to pursue a blended learning approach. They'll be using blended distance learning approach, which includes printed modules, online, on air. So, so we are trying to help out in all of those areas, And this specific webinar that we did together in partnership with the University of the Philippines Open University is focused on helping teachers and students learn how to learn online. Because that's the first thing that they have to do. Mhm.
Sir, how has the reception been so far when you're talking about e-learning? I mean, a lot of people have just been waiting for classes to go back to normal. You know, many
Yeah.
have just said this situation is temporary. Are teachers now on the wagon? Are they saying, okay, ito na talaga. This is the time that we have to do things differently? And are they excited about it? Is there still a lot of apprehension?
Well, it's not going to be easy, Danny, to be, I think, to be fair to everyone, because this thing just fell on people's laps, di ba? Hindi naman ito napaghandaan over many years or so, which is what you would normally want to do if you're going to make such a large transition like this. No
Mhm.
time, very little time to do this thing. So everybody's in a rush. But wherever there is challenge and crisis, there's also opportunity. And in this case, I think this is a forced to good opportunity to really promote online learning. I know of a number of colleges and universities, Danny, whose strategy actually is to go online. They really
Okay.
want to develop that capability to conduct online education so that they can serve not only their immediate community, but anyone in the Philippines, and for that matter, anyone in the world who would like to take a degree in a degree course in their college or university. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging, but we think it can be done with everybody's cooperation and support.
Sir, does PLDT find this just as a temporary solution habang, classes are still closed? The
Hmm.
President Duterte announced that maybe on January 2021 they will start reopening. Is this a band-aid solution, or are you really gearing up for the new normal? And like you mentioned, schools should start doing blended learning. Maybe we will never really go back to the classrooms anymore. And is this actually a good alternative, a good enough
Uh,
alternative?
no, I think hopefully we're looking forward to the time that the people can go back to schools, right? But I think this experience will alter the way that schools are operated, managed, and conducted. I think after this experience, there will be a permanent place for online education. Um, there are various aspects to this, Danis. People tend to focus on the technology, the
Correct.
connections, etc., etc.
Yes.
But beneath that, or behind that rather, is the pedagogy.
Hmm.
There is the approach or the philosophy of learning behind it is also as significant. What do I mean? Take the case of UPOU. UPOU actually started off with printed modules. Remember
Hmm.
that? I don't know if you're
Okay.
old enough to remember this,
Of
Danny,
course.
but
Wala pang wifi ng university, sir.
UPOU started out with printed modules. Their students would go to a certain place, pick up the modules, and then mail it back, and they would receive mail also. And later on, when email started, they would get email. But it started with printed modules, and they evolved an effective system for learning that actually delivered. No,
Okay.
there's another thing behind it that I want to highlight because this is often overlooked. When you go into distance learning, you cannot be as reliant as you would normally be in a school on your teacher.
Okay. It's more
And
independent learning.
correct. And I would
Okay.
really emphasize the word independent learners.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
it's got its pluses and minuses, because teachers will tell you there's always no substitute for having a classroom environment
Mm-hmm.
where a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people can interact, etc., etc. But a lot can also be said for distance learning, especially if it is done in the right way, because distance learning is anchored in a very important principle: independent learning. The
Mm-hmm.
child has to learn to become an independent learning. And for me personally,
Mm-hmm.
once a child becomes an independent learner, Danny, you're letting go of a tiger.
Exactly. So it's not about the platforms available or the type digital or analog. It's really more about the professor being a facilitator rather than spoon feeding the person and the student actually taking it on for himself.
Well, another metaphor for that, Danny, is the teacher, rather being the source or the fountain of all wisdom, becomes a coach.
Correct.
In a
Correct.
basketball team, it's not the coach who scores the points, right?
It's a student.
it's the it's the players, it's the
Hindi na
students who scores
almighty.
the. But the coach has a very vital role to play. He has to
Mm-hmm.
show the guys, oops, no, 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 not this, not this. This is the way you do it, etc., etc. but the persons who executes it is the student. And in that
Mm-hmm.
process, he learns much more effectively, and much more richly than a person who is spoon-fed all the lessons
Correct.
of the day. So it's not just the technology. You have to look at the pedagogy. Oh gosh, I'm sounding like an educator. Anyway,
That's great, sir. We want that.
no. Well, when
What
you
about
listen to
future
all,
plans?
well, we'll talk about that. But
We'll talk about
when you
that. Go
listen,
ahead, sir.
when you listen to the experts, you kind of get something, you get wet somehow, But
Mm-hmm.
but for me, that was my biggest learning. That technology is great, it's fine, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to combine it with the right pedagogy, the right approach, the right learning strategy. And for me, the most impressive thing, and this is something I really emphasize because people tend not to see it because it's hard to see. It's
Mm-hmm.
underneath.
Mm-hmm.
It's independent learning. If we can
Okay.
get our students through online learning, through distance learning, through modules, to become more and more independent learners, oh gosh, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's great. I think that's great.
So very good point there. You know, other studies have actually shown that the students or the Filipino population in general are very tech savvy, diba? So they have what
Mm,
it takes.
mm,
It's
mm,
really a matter of the infrastructure, the government also supporting the initiatives and also the upskilling that's happening. But you've mentioned about infrastructure. I'm gonna have to ask, what are you
mm.
doing in terms of that? There's still even telecommunication companies have said, people are cutting on their data plans because there's less money in consumers' pockets. Of course, even if they want to do
Mm.
certain things, it's going to be expensive. Staying home, keeping the power on. Usually
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
school is actually the time where you don't use the data. You don't need to pay for internet
Ah,
anymore. Diba? How are you
mm.
making these things more accessible and sustainable?
Okay. I go back to what I said earlier. We take our lead from the educators because they have the overall view. They know what the situation of their school is, their teachers, and their students. So we ask them, what do you need? How can we
Mm-hmm.
help? And we've been doing that with individual schools and with school associations, for example, like PACU,
Mm-hmm.
the association, which has, I think, over 186 colleges and universities as members. We have
Yes.
been discussing with them. We've also been talking, of course, with DepEd, and listening to what they want to do. Because that's the starting point. At the end of the day,
Sir,
it's not what we
sorry
want
to
to do,
interrupt.
it's what they
Does
want to
does
do.
this
Sure.
does this come into play with the TV platforms that the government is looking at? Are you going to somehow have some sort of collaboration?
Well, I understand, Danny, that Signal TV has made a proposal itself, now
Mm-hmm.
offering two of its channels for possible use as educational channels. And I think
Okay.
that's a great proposal. I mean, I understand the other TV networks have also offered their services, which is fine. Kasi kailangan tulong-tulong ito.
Mm.
No single group can do this. But the idea of using television and radio is also an interesting alternative. Really, it's
Okay.
the question, the challenge for us, Danny, is not the technology only. And that's also a
Mm-hmm.
challenge, of course, but it's also our ability to use the technology. Are our teachers and our students primed properly to be able to learn through these mediums, through these
Mm-hmm.
channels? Well, my sense is what's going to happen to us is I remember when I was studying how to learn swimming. uh, I had an old I had an old-fashioned teacher, who would line us up
Oh.
and just dump us into the swimming pool.
Ganun na pala ngayon, sir. Okay.
But and I to a certain extent, unfortunately, I think that's what's going to happen to us now,
Mm.
because I mean, to be fair to us, there was no time. It just
Correct.
we just ended up with this situation on our laps. So, but I think we're going to have to learn by doing to a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's why we ran these webinars, no, in order to help our teachers make this adjustment. For example, this is something that should be interesting to you, Danny.
Go ahead, sir.
One of the things that the teachers need to do now, if they're going to do online education, and for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
broadcast, do using TV and radio, is they have to become broadcasters.
Yes, exciting. Like me.
No,
Profs
seriously,
turning to anchors. Go ahead.
what the schools are now doing, both in the private sector as well as in the government, and I think the news has come out also that the
Mm-hmm.
DepEd as a team of teacher broadcasters now. But
Yes, yes.
what they're doing is you that instead of having teacher one on one rather to classes, they're now organizing teams of teachers.
Okay.
They're becoming like production teams. There
Correct.
somebody's going to be on air, okay? He'll be the
Yeah.
face, he or she will be the face, but you need a producer,
The
you need a script
content, the writer.
content.
Yeah.
Somebody has to produce infographics and multimedia materials to support
Correct.
your lesson. So that's one of
Yes.
the changes that teachers have to do when they go online. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to reorganize themselves. I know one school, one college that has really been pushing it. They had already ambitions of becoming an online university even before COVID. Now they're going full blast. No? They're reorganizing
Mm-hmm.
their faculty so that the teams are now organized as production teams for
Okay.
multimedia broadcasting.
Super
Okay.
fun, sir. Sir, before I let you go, tell us about that school in a bag. How many schools will get these
Uh,
bags? What's inside this bag? And how do you select the priority areas? I mean, everybody needs some sort
okay.
of help here. Which ones are you focusing on in terms of the highest need? Is it elementary education, high school? You know, what is it? Higher education? What are you focusing
Okay.
on?
Again, we take our lead from the educators. And the word we're getting is that we need to focus this kind of effort, school in the bag effort, for schools in remote areas, uplands, or in remote islands, small islands, no? Where we have, I think, I don't know, I forgot to count already, something like 3,000 schools that don't have water and electricity. Okay?
Okay.
So
Okay.
those are the target areas. Also, those schools which are multi-grade. You
Mm-hmm.
have grade 1 to 7 in one classroom.
Ah,
Okay?
interesting. Okay.
To give an example of what that means, we did a program with UNICEF, distributed about 50 of these school in a bags to schools in the provinces of the island of Samar. And the
Okay.
reason why those schools were chosen was because they're predominantly multi-grade.
Mm-hmm.
And using these, we have already developed a system that how you can use the devices. The current design of these school in a bags is there are 20 tablets in each
Wow.
bag, together
Okay.
with one laptop for the teacher. And the idea is to use these learning devices because they come with software and educational
Mm-hmm.
content.
Okay.
They have apps, for example, that teach you in Waray how to
Nice.
count and the alphabet. So we have
Okay.
Waray, Ilocano, Kapampangan, of course, Tagalog, Cebuano, and we also have one in Arabic. Okay,
Interesting, sir.
so
So, go ahead.
so we target those areas, no, which
Mm-hmm.
have these special requirements. So, like I said, we'll take our lead from the educators and follow the lead where to deploy.
And also the low-hanging fruit and the ones most important. And sir, finally,
Hmm.
congratulations on 25 years as the face of PLDT and Smart. We just want to
You're
say thank you
reminding
so
me
much
how
for
old I
being.
am.
No, thank you so much for being here and supporting our show all the time. Any exciting plans moving forward, sir?
Nako, abangan na lang. I'll give you the usual showbiz answer.
Abangan na lang. Okay,
Okay.
so that was of course Mon Isberto from PLDT. Thank you, sir, and Godspeed. Stay safe, sir.
Thank you very much.
And that's a first look into the business day. Today is August 13, 2020. Catch us again tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I'm Danie Laurel, and we are One News.